Hello and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live. I am your host, Beau Heckman. This is produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. Today is day 2 of Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. This is a very, very bizarre, very exciting piece, and Bradbury is very close to the Twilight Zone for me, and I think one of the inspirations for that. I have nothing to back that up except my instinct. But I'm going to jump right in. We stopped at chapter 9 yesterday, and we're just going to pick up right where we left off yesterday. So welcome back. Hope you're having a great day today. Chapter 9. Something Wicked This Way Comes. No one else in the world had a name came off so well off the tongue. Jim Nightshade. That's me. Jim stood tall and now lay long in bed, strung together by marsh grass, his bones easy in his flesh easy on his bones. The library books lay unopened by his relaxed right hand. Waiting, his eyes were dark as twilight, with shadows under the eyes from the time. His mother said he had almost died when he was 3, and still remembered. His hair was dark autumn chestnut, and the veins in his temples and brow, and in his neck, and ticking in his wrists, and on the backs of his slender hands, all these were dark blue. He was marbled with dark, was Jim Nightshade, a boy who talked less and smiled less as the years increased. The trouble with Jim was he looked at the world and could not look away. And when you never look away all your life, by the time you are 13, you have done 20 years in taking in the laundry of the world. Will Holloway, it was in him young to always look just beyond, over to one side. So at 13, he had saved up only 6 years of staring. Jim knew every centimeter of his shadow, could have cut it out of tar paper, furled it, and run it up a flagpole. His banner. Well, he was occasionally surprised to see his shadow floating, following him somewhere, but that was that. Jim, you awake? Hi, Mom. A door opened and now shut. He felt her weight on the bed. Why, Jim, your hands are ice. You shouldn't have the windows so high. Mind your health. Sure. Don't say sure that way. You don't know until you've had 3 children and lost all but 1. Never going to have any, said Jim. You just say that. I know it. I know everything. She waited a moment. What do you know? No use making more people. People die. His voice was very calm and quiet, and almost sad. That's everything. Almost everything. You're here, Jim. If you weren't, I'd have given up long ago. Mom. A long silence. Can you remember Dad's face? Do I look like him? The day you go away is the day he leaves forever. Who's going away? Why, just lying there, Jim. You run so fast. I never saw anyone move so much. Just sleeping. Promise me, Jim, whenever you go and come back, bring lots of kids. Let them run wild. Let me spoil them someday. I'm never going to own anything can hurt me. You going to collect rocks, Jim? No? Someday, you've got to be hurt. No, I don't. He looked at her. Her face had been hit a long time ago. The bruises had never gone from around her eyes. You'll live and get hurt, she said in the dark. But when it's time Tell me. Say goodbye. Otherwise, I might not let you go. Wouldn't that be terrible? To just grab a hold? She rose up suddenly and went to put the window down. Why do boys want their windows open wide? Warm blood. Warm blood? She stood alone. That's the story of all our sorrows. And don't ask why. The door shut. Jim, alone, raised the window and leaned into the absolutely clear night. Storm? He thought. You there? Yes. Feel away to the west. A real humdinger, rushing along. The shadow of the lightning rod lay in the drive below. He sucked in cold air, gave out a vast exhilaration of heat. Why, he thought, why don't I climb up, knock that lightning rod loose, throw it away, and then see what happens? Yes, and then see what happens. Just after midnight, shuffling footsteps. Along the empty street came the lightning rod salesman. His leather valise swung almost empty in his baseball mitt hand, his face at ease. He turned a corner and stopped. Paper soft white moths tapped at an empty store window looking in. And in the window, like a great coffin boat of star-colored glass, beached on two sawhorses, lay a chunk of Alaska Snow Company ice, chopped to a size great enough to flash in a giant's ring. And sealed in this ice was the most beautiful woman in the world. The lightning rod salesman's face faded. In the dreaming coldness of ice, like someone fallen and slept in snow avalanches 1,000 years, forever young, was this woman. She was as fair as this morning, and fresh as tomorrow's flowers, and lovely as any maid when a man shuts up his eyes and traps her in cameo perfection on the shell of his eyelids. The lightning rod salesman remembered to breathe. Once, long ago, traveling amongst the marbles of Rome and Florence, he had seen women like this, kept in stone instead of ice. Once, wandering in the Louvre, he had found women like this, washed in summer color and kept in paint. Once, as a boy, sneaking the cool grottos behind a motion picture theater screen, on his way to a free seat, he had glanced up and there, towering, flooding the haunted dark screen, seen a woman's face as he had never seen it since, of such size and beauty, built of milk bone and moon flesh. Had to freeze him there along behind the stage, shadowed by the motion of her lips, the bird-wing flicker of her eyes, the snow-pale death-shimmering illumination from her cheeks. So, from the other years there jumped forth images which flowed and found new substance here within the ice. What color was her hair? It was blonde to whiteness, and might take any color once set free of cold. How tall was she? The prism of the ice might well multiply her size, or diminish her as you moved this way or that, before the empty house, the window, the night soft rap tapping, ever fingering, gently probing moths. Not important. For above all, the lightning rod salesman shivered. He knew the most extraordinary thing. If by some miracle her eyelids should open within that sapphire, and she should look at him, he knew what color her eyes would be. He knew what color her eyes would be. If one were to enter this lonely night shop, if one were to put forth one's hand, the warmth of that hand would... what? Melt the ice. The lightning rod salesman stood there for a long moment, his eyes quickened shut. He let out his breath. It was warm as summer on his teeth. His hand touched the shop door. It swung open. Cold Arctic air blew around him. He stepped in. The door shut. The white snowflake moths tapped at the window. Midnight then, and the town clocks chiming on toward 1 and 2, and then 3 in the deep morning, and the peals of the great clocks shaking dust off old toys in attics, and shedding silver off old mirrors in yet higher attics, and up dreams about clocks in all beds where children slept. Will heard it, muffled away in the prairie lands, the chuffing of an engine, the slow, slow following dragon glide of a train. Will sat up in bed. Across the way, like a mirror image, Jim sat up too. A calliope began to play, oh so softly, grieving to itself 1,000,000 miles away. In one single motion, Will leaned from his window, as did Jim. Without a word, they gazed over the trembling surf of the trees. Their rooms were high, as boys' rooms should be. From these gaunt windows, they could rifle fire their gaze artillery distances past library, city hall, depot, cow barns, farmlands to empty prairie. There, on the world's rim, the lovely snail gleam of the railway tracks ran, flinging wind gesticulations of lemon or cherry-colored semaphore to the stars. There, in the precipice of earth, a small stream feather uprose like the first of a storm cloud yet to come. The train itself appeared, link by link, engine, coal car, and numerous and numbered all asleep and slumbering dream-filled cars that followed the fiery firefly-sparked chum, chant, drowsy autumn heart-fire roar. Hellfires flushed the stunning hills. Even at this remote view, one imagined men with buffalo-hunched arms, shoveling black meteor falls of coal into the open boilers of the engine. The engine! Both boys vanished, came back to life, binoculars. The engine! Civil War. No, the other stack like that since 1900. The rest of the train, all of it's old. The flags, the cages, it's the carnival. They listened. At first Will thought he heard the air whistling fast in his nostrils. But no, it was the train, and the calliope sighing, weeping on that train. Sounds like church music. Hell, why would a carnival play church music? Don't say hell, hissed Will. Hell, Jim ferociously leaned out. I've saved up all day. Everyone's asleep, so... Hell! The music drifted by their windows. Goose pimples rose bid as boils on Will's arms. That is church music. Changed. For cry... I'm froze. Let's go watch them set up. At 3 a.m.? At 3 a.m. Jim vanished. For a moment, Will watched Jim dance around over there, shirt uplifted, pants going on, while off in night country, panting, churning was this funeral train, all black-plumed cars, licorice-colored cages, and sooty calliope clamoring, banging 3 different hymns mixed and lost, maybe not there at all. Here goes nothing. Jim slid down the drainpipe on his house, toward the sleeping lawns. Jim, wait! Will thrashed into his clothes. Jim, don't go alone! And followed after. Sometimes you see a kite so high, so wise, it almost knows the wind. It travels, then chooses to land in one spot and no other, and no matter how you yank, run this way or that, it will simply break its cord, seek its resting place, and bring you, blood-mouthed, running. Jim, wait for me! So now Jim was the kite, and the wild twine cut, and whatever wisdom was his taking him away from Will who could only run, earthbound, after one so high and dark silent and suddenly strange. Jim, here I come! And running, Will thought, boy, it's the same old thing. I talk, Jim runs. I tilt stones, Jim grabs the cold junk under the stones, and lickety-split, I climb hills. Jim yells off church steeples. I got a bank account. Jim's got the hair on his head, the yell in his mouth, the shirt on his back, and the tennis shoes on his feet. How come I think he's richer? Because, Will thought, I sit on a rock in the sun, and old Jim, he prickles his arm hairs by moonlight and dances with hop toads. I tend cows. Jim tames Gila monsters. Fool! I yell at Jim. Coward! He yells back. And here we go. And they ran from town across fields, and both froze under a rail bridge with the moon ready beyond the hills, and the meadows trembling with a fur of dew. Wham! The carnival train thundered the bridge. The calliope wailed. There's no one playing it, Jim started up. Jim, no jokes. Mother's honor, look! Going away. Away. The calliope pipes shimmered with star explosions, but no one sat at the high keyboard. The wind, sluicing air, water, air in the pipes, made the music. The boys ran. The train curved away, gonging its undersea funeral bell, sunk, rusted, green-mossed, tolling, tolling. Then the engine whistle blew a great steam whiff, and Will broke out in pearls of ice. Way late at night, Will had heard, how often, train whistles jetting steam along the rim of sleep, forlorn, alone and far, no matter how near they came. Sometimes he woke to find tears on his cheek, asked why, lay back, listened, and thought, yes, they make me cry. Going east, going west, the trains so far gone in country deeps, they drown in tides of sleep that escape of the towns. Those trains and their grieving sounds were lost forever between stations, not remembering where they had been, not guessing where they might go, exhaling their last pale breaths over the horizon, gone. So it was with all trains, ever. Yet this train's whistle, the wails of a lifetime were gathered in it from other nights in other slumbering years, the howl of moon-dreamed dogs, the seep of river-cold winds through January porch screens which stopped the blood, 1,000 fire sirens weeping, or worse, the outgone shreds of breath, the protests of 1 billion people dead or dying, not wanting to be dead, their groans, their sighs burst over the earth. Tears jumped into Will's eyes. He lurched, he knelt, he pretended to lace one shoe. But then he saw Jim's hands clap his ears, his eyes wet too. The whistle screamed. Jim screamed against the scream. The whistle shrieked. Will shrieked against the shriek. Then the billion voices ceased, instantly, as if the train had plunged in a firestorm off the earth. The train skimmed on softly, slithering, black peanuts fluttering, black confetti lost on its own sick, sweet, candy wind, down the hill, with the boys pursuing, the air so cold they ate ice cream with each breath. They climbed at last, rise to look down. Boy, whispered Jim. The train had pulled off into Rolf's Moon Meadow, so called because town couples came out to see the moon rise here over a land so wide, so long, it was like an inland sea, filled with grass in spring, or hay in late summer, or snow in winter. It was fine walking here along its crisp shore, with the moon coming up to tremble on its tides. Well, the carnival train was crouched there now in the autumn grass, in the old spur, near the woods, and the boys crept and lay down under the brush, waiting. "It's so quiet," whispered Will. The train just stood in the middle of the dry autumn field. No one in the locomotive, no one in the tender, no one in any of the cars behind. All black under the moon, and just the small sounds of its metal cooling, ticking on the rails. "Sst," said Jim. "I feel them moving in there." We felt the cat fuzz on his body bramble up by the thousands. "You think they mind us watching?" "Maybe," said Jim happily. "Then why the noisy calliope?" "When I figure that," Jim said, "I'll tell you." "Look!" Whisper. As if exhaling itself straight down from the sky, a vast, moss-green balloon touched at the moon. It hovered 200 yards above and away, quietly riding the wind. The basket under the balloon, someone in it. But then, a tall man stepped down from the train, caboose platform like a captain assaying the tidal weathers of this inland sea. An all-dark suit, shadow-faced. He waded to the center of the meadow, his shirt as black as the gloved hands he now stretched into the sky. He gestured once, and the train came to life. At first, a head lifted in one window, then an arm, then another head like a puppet in a marionette theater. Suddenly, two men in black were carrying a dark tent pole out across the hissing grass. It was the silence that made Will pull back, even as Jim leaned forward, eyes moon bright. A carnival should be all growls, roars like timberlands stacked, bundled, rolled, and crashed, great explosions of lion dust, men ablaze with working anger, pop bottles jangling, horse buckles shivering, engines and elephants in full stampede through their rains of sweat, while zebras neighed and trembled like cage trapped in cage. But this was like old movies. The silent theater haunted with black and white ghosts, silvery mouth opening to let moonlight smoke out. Gestures made in silence so hushed you could hear the wind fizz the air on your cheeks. More shadows rustled from the train. Passing the animal cages where darkness prowled with unlit eyes, and the calliope stood mute, save for the faintest idiot tune the breeze piped wandering up the flues. The ringmaster stood in the middle of the land. The balloon, like a vast moldy green cheese, stood fixed to the sky. Then darkness came. The last thing Will saw was the balloon swooping down as clouds moved, covered the moon. In the night, he felt the men rush to unseen tasks. He sensed the balloon, like a great fat spider, fiddling with the lines and poles, rearing a tapestry in the sky. The clouds arose. The balloon sifted up. In the meadow stood the skeleton main poles and wires of the main tent, waiting for its canvas skin. More clouds poured over the white moon, shadowed. Will shivered. He heard Jim crawling forward, seized his ankle, felt him stiffen. "Wait," said Will. "They're bringing out the canvas." "No," said Jim. "Oh, no." For somehow instead they both knew the wires high flung on the poles were catching swift clouds, ripping them free from the wind in streamers, which, stitched and sewn by some great monster shadow, made canvas and more canvas as the tent took shape. At last, there was the clear water sound of vast flags blowing. The motion stopped. The darkness, with darkness, was still. Will lay, eyes shut, hearing the beat of great oil-black wings, as if a huge, ancient bird had drummed down to live, to breathe, to survive in the night meadow. The clouds blew away. The balloon was gone. The men were gone. The tents rippled like black rain on their poles. Suddenly it seemed a long way to town. Instinctively, Will glanced behind himself. Nothing but grass and whispers. Slowly, he looked back at the silent, dark, seemingly empty tents. "I don't like it," he said. Jim could not tear his eyes away. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah." Will stood up. Jim lay on the earth. "Jim," said Will. Jim jerked his head as if slapped. He was on his knees. He swayed up. His body turned, but his eyes were fastened to those black flags, the great sideshow signs swarming with unguessed wings, horns and demon smiles. A bird screamed. Jim jumped. Jim gasped. Cloud shadows panicked them over the hills to the edge of town. From there, the two boys ran alone. The air was cold, blowing in through the wide-open library window. Charles Holloway had stood there for a long time. Now he quickened. Along the street below fled two shadows, two boys above them matching shadows stride for stride. They softly printed the night air with treads. "Jim!" cried the old man. "Will!" But not aloud. The boys went away towards home. Charles Holloway looked out into the country. Wandering alone in the library, letting his broom tell him things no one else could hear. He had heard the whistle and the disjointed calliope hymns. 3, he now said, half aloud. 3 in the morning. In the meadow, the tents, the carnival waited. Waited for someone, anyone to wade along the grassy surf. The great tents filled like bellows. They softly issued forth exhalations of air that smelled like ancient yellow beasts. But only the moon looked in at the hollow dark, the deep caverns. Outside, night beasts hung in mid-gallop on a carousel. Beyond lay fathoms of mirror maze, which housed a multifold series of empty vanities, one wave on another, still, serene, silvered with age, white with time. Any shadow at the entrance might stir reverberations, the color of fright, unraveled deep-buried moons. If a man stood there, would he see himself unfolded away 1 billion times to eternity? Would 1 billion images look back, each face, and the face after, and the face after that old, older, oldest? Would he find himself lost in a fine dust away off deep down there, not 50 but 60, not 60 but 70, not 70 but 80, 90, 99 years old? The maze did not ask. The maze did not tell. It simply stood and waited like a great Arctic flow. 3 o'clock. Charles Holloway was cold. His skin was suddenly a lizard's skin. His stomach, filled with blood, turned to rust. His mouth tasted of night damps. Yet he could not turn from the library window. Far off, something glittered in the meadow. It was moonlight, flashing on a great glass. Perhaps the light said something. Perhaps it spoke in code. "I'll go there," thought Charles Holloway. "I won't go there." "I like it," he thought. "I don't like it." A moment later, the library door slammed. Going home, he passed the empty store window. Inside stood 2 abandoned sawhorses. Between lay a pool of water. In the water floated a few shards of ice. In the ice were a few long strands of hair. Charles Holloway saw but chose not to see. He turned and was gone. The street was soon as empty as the hardware store window. Far away, in the meadow, shadows flickered in the mirror maze, as if parts of someone's life, yet unborn, were trapped there, waiting to be lived. So the maze waited, its cold gaze ready for so much as a bird to come look, see, and fly away shrieking. But no bird came. 3, a voice said. We listened, cold but warming, glad to be in with a roof above, floor below, wall and door between. Too much exposure, too much freedom, too much night. 3. Dad's voice, home now, moving down the hall, speaking to itself. 3. Why, thought Will, that's when the train came. Had Dad seen, heard, followed? No, he mustn't. Will hunched himself. Why not? He trembled. What did he fear? The carnival rushing in like a black stampede of storm waves on the shore out beyond? Of him and Jim and Dad knowing? Of the town asleep, not knowing? Was that it? Yes. Will buried himself deep. Yes. 3. 3 in the morning, thought Charles Holloway, seated on the edge of his bed. Why did the train come at that hour? For, he thought, it's a special hour. Women never wake then, do they? They sleep the sleep of babes and children. But men in middle age? They know that hour well. Oh God, midnight's not bad. You wake and go back to sleep. 1 or 2's not bad. You toss but sleep again. 5 or 6 in the morning, not bad. There's hope, for dawn's just under the horizon. But 3? No. Christ! 3 a.m. The blood moves slow. You're the nearest to dead you'll ever be, save dying. Sleep is a patch of death, but 3 in the morn, full wide awake staring, is living death. You dream with your eyes open. God, if you had strength to rouse up, you'd slaughter your half-dreams with buckshot. But no, you lie pinned to a deep well bottom that's burned dry. The moon rolls by to look at you down there with its idiot face. It's a long way back to sunset, a far way on to dawn. So you summon all the fool things of your life, the stupid, lovely things done with people known so very well, who are now so very dead. And wasn't it true? Had he read it somewhere? More people in hospitals die at 3 a.m. than at any other time? Stop! He cried silently. Charlie? His wife said in her sleep. Slowly, he took off the other shoe. His wife smiled in her sleep. Why? She's immortal. She has a son. Your son, too. But what father ever really believes it? He carries no burden. He feels no pain. What man, like woman, lies down in darkness and gets up with child? The gentle, smiling ones own the good secret. Oh, what strange, wonderful clocks women are. They nest in time. They make the flesh that holds fast and binds eternity. They live inside the gift. No power, accept, and need not mention it. Why speak of time when you are time? And shape the universal moments as they pass into warmth and action. How men envy and often hate these warm clocks, these wives who know they will live forever. So what do? We men turn terribly mean because we can't hold to the world ourselves or anything. We are blind to continuity. All breaks down, falls, melts, stops, rots, or runs away. So, since we cannot shape time, where does that leave men? Sleepless, staring. 3 a.m. That's our reward. 3 in the morn, the soul's midnight, The tide goes out, the soul ebbs, and a train arrives at an hour of despair. Why? Charlie? His wife's hand moved to his. You all right, Charlie? She drowsed. He did not answer. He could not tell her how he was. The sun rose yellow as a lemon. The sky was round and blue. The birds looped clear water songs in the air. And Jim leaned from their windows. Nothing had changed, except the look in Jim's eyes. Last night, said Will, did or didn't it happen? They both gazed toward the far meadows. The air was sweet as syrup. They could find no shadows anywhere, even under the trees. 6 minutes, cried Jim. 5. 4 minutes later, cornflakes lurching in their stomachs, they frisked the leaves to a fine red dust going out of town. With a wild flutter of breath, they raised their eyes from the earth they had been treading. And the carnival was there. Hey! For the tents were lemon like the sun, brass like wheat fields and a few weeks ago. Flags and banners, bright as bluebirds, snapped above the lion-colored canvas. From booths, painted cotton candy colors, fine Saturday smells of bacon and eggs. Hot dogs and pancakes swam with the wind. Everywhere ran boys. Everywhere sleepy fathers followed. It's just a plain old carnival, said Will. Like heck, said Jim. We weren't blind last night. Come on. They marched 100 yards straight on and deep into the midway. And the deeper they went, the more obvious it became they would find no right men cat-treading shadow while strange tents plumed like thunderclouds. Instead, close up, the carnival was mildewed rope, moth-eaten canvas, rain-worn, sun-bleached tinsel. The sideshow paintings hung like sad albatrosses on their poles, flapped and let fall flakes of ancient paint, shivering at the same time, revealing the unwondrous wonders of a thin man, fat man, needlehead, tattooed man, hula dancer. They prowled on, but found no mysterious midnight sphere of evil gas tied by mysterious oriental knots to daggers plunged in dark earth. No maniac ticket-takers bent on terrible revenges. The calliope by the ticket booth neither screamed deaths nor hummed idiot songs to itself. The train pulled off on a spur in the warming grass. It was old, yes, and welded tight with rust, but it looked like a titanic magnet that had collected to itself from locomotive-borne yards across 3 continents, drive shafts, flywheels, smokestacks, and hand-me-down second-rate nightmares. It did not cut a black and mortuary silhouette. It asked permission but to lie dead in autumn strewings, so much tired steam and iron gunpowder blowing away. Jim! Will! Here came Miss Foley, their 7th-grade schoolteacher, along the midway, all smiles. Boys, she said, what's wrong? You look as if you lost something. Well, said Will, last night, did you hear that calliope? Calliope? No. Then why are you out here so early, Miss Foley? Asked Jim. I love carnivals, said Miss Foley. A little woman lost somewhere in her gray 50s, beaming around. I'll buy hot dogs, and you eat while I look for my fool nephew. You seen him? Nephew? Robert. Staying with me a few weeks. Father's dead. Mother's sick in Wisconsin. I took him in. He ran out here early today. Said he'd meet me. But you know boys. My, you look glum. She shoved food at them. Eat, cheer up. Ride's open in 10 minutes. Meantime, I think I'll spy through that mirror maze and—" "No," said Will. "No what?" asked Miss Foley. "No mirror maze," Will swallowed. He stared at fathoms of reflections. You could never strike bottom there. It was like winter standing tall, waiting to kill you with a glance. "Miss Foley," he said at last, and wondered to hear his mouth say it. "Don't go in there." "Why not?" Jim peered, fascinated, into Will's face. "Yeah, tell us. Why not?" "People get lost," said Will, lamely. "All the more reason. Robert might be wandering loose and not find his way out if I don't grab his ear." "Never can tell." Will could not take his eyes off the millions of miles of blind grass. What might be around in there? "Swimming," Miss Foley laughed. "What a lovely mind you have, Willie." "Well, yes, but I'm an old fish, so—" "Miss Foley!" Miss Foley waved, poised, took a step, and vanished into the mirror ocean. They watched as she settled, wandered, sank deep, deep, and was finally dissolved, gray among silver. Jim grabbed Will. "What was all that?" "Gosh, Jim, it's the mirrors. They're the only things I don't like. I mean, they're the only things like last night." Boy, you've been out in the sun," snorted Jim. "That maze there is—" His voice trailed off. He sniffed the cold air blowing out as from an ice house between the tall reflections. "Jim, you were saying?" But Jim said nothing. After a long time, he clapped his hand to the back of his neck. "It really does," he cried in soft amaze. "What does?" "Hair. I read it all my life in scary stories. It stands on end. Mine is doing it now." "Gosh, Jim, so's mine." They stood, entranced with the delicious cold bumps on their necks and the suddenly stiffened small hairs quilled up over their scalps. There was a flourish of light and shadow. Bumping through the mirror maze, they saw 2, 4, a dozen Miss Foleys. They didn't know which one was real, so they waved to all of them. But none of the Miss Foleys saw or waved back. Blind she walked. Blind, she tacked her nails to cold glass. "Miss Foley!" Her eyes, flexed wide as from blasts of photographic powder, were skinned white like a statue's. Deep under the glass, she spoke. She murmured. She whimpered. Now she cried. Now she shouted. Now she yelled. She knocked glass with her head, her elbows, tilted drunken as a light blind moth, raised her hands in claws. "Oh, God, help!" she wailed. "Help, oh, God!" Jim and Will saw their own faces, pale, their own eyes wide in the mirrors as they plunged. "Miss Foley, here!" Jim cracked his brow. "This way!" But Will only found cold glass. A hand flew from empty space, an old woman's hand, sinking for the last time. It seized anything to save itself. The anything was Will. She pulled him under. "Will!" "Jim! Jim!" And Jim held him, and he held her, and pulled her free of the silently rushing mirrors coming in from the desolate seas. They stepped into sunlight. Miss Foley, one hand to her bruised cheek, bleated, muttered, then laughed quickly, then gasped and wiped her eyes. "Thank you, Will. Jim, oh, thank you. I'd have drowned. Oh, Will, you were right. My God, did you see her? She's lost. Drowned in there. Poor girl. Oh, the poor girl's lost. Sweet. Save her. Oh, we must save her." Miss Foley, boy, you're hurting. Will firmly removed her fists from clenching the flesh of his arm. "There's no one in there." "I saw her. Please, look. Save her." Will jumped to the maze entrance and stopped. The ticket taker gave him an idle glance of contempt. Will backed away to Miss Foley. "I swear, No one went in ahead or after you, ma'am. It's my fault. I joked about the water. You must have gotten mixed up, lost, and scared." But if she heard, she went on biting the back of her hand, her voice the voice of someone come out of the sea after no air, a long dread time deep, no hope of life and now set free. "Gone? She's at the bottom, poor girl. I knew her. I know you. I said when I first saw her a minute ago, I waved. She said, she waved. Hello. I ran. Bang. I fell. She fell. A dozen, 1,000 of her fell." "Wait," I said. "Oh, she looks so fine, so lovely, so young." But it scared me. "What are you doing here?" I said. "Why, I think she said, 'I'm real. You're not.'" She laughed, way underwater. She ran off in the maze. "We must find her before—" Miss Foley, Will's arm around her, took a last trembling breath and grew strangely quiet. Jim was staring deep into those cold mirrors, looking for sharks that could not be seen. "Miss Foley," he said, "what did she look like?" Miss Foley's voice was pale but calm. "The fact is, she looked like myself many, many years ago." "I'll go home now," she said. "Miss Foley will—" "No, stay. I'm just fine. Have fun, boys. Enjoy." And she walked slowly away, alone, down the midway. Somewhere, a vast animal made water. Ammonia made the wind turn ancient as it passed. "I'm leaving," said Will. "Will," said Jim, "we're staying until sundown. Boy, dark sundown and figure it all. You chicken?" "No," murmured Will. "But anybody want to dive back in that maze?" Jim gazed fiercely deep into the bottomless sea, where now only the pure light glanced back at itself. Help up emotion, emptiness upon emptiness, beyond emptiness before their eyes. Nobody. Jim let his heart beat twice. I guess. A bad thing happened at sunset. Jim vanished. Through noon and afternoon, they had screamed half up the rides, knocked over dirty milk bottles, smashed Cupid doll winning plates, smelling, listening, looking their way through the autumn crowd trampling the leafy sawdust. And then, quite suddenly, Jim was gone. And Will, not asking anyone but himself, absolutely silent, certain sure, walked steadily through the late crowd as the sky was turning plum-colored until he came to the maze and paid his dime and stepped up inside and called softly just one time. "Jim?" And Jim was there. Half in, half out of the cold glass tides, like someone abandoned on a seashore when a dose friend has gone far out, and there is wonder if he will ever come back. Jim stood as if he had not moved so much as an eyelash in 5 minutes, staring, his mouth half open, waiting for the next wave to come in and show him more. "Jim, get out of there!" "Will," Jim said faintly, "let me be." "Like heck!" With one leap, Will grabbed Jim's belt and halted and hauled. Shuffling backward, Jim did not seem to know he was being dragged from the maze, for he kept protesting in awe at some unseen wonder. "Oh, Will. Oh, Willie. Will. Oh, Willie." "Jim, you nut! I'm taking you home." "What? What?" They were in cold air. The sky was darker than plums now, with a few clouds burning late sunfire above. The sunfire flamed on Jim's feverish cheeks, his open lips, his wide and terribly rich green shining eyes. Jim, what'd you see in there? The same as Miss Foley? What? What? I'm gonna bust your nose. Come on. He hustled, pulled, shoved, half carried this fever, this elation, unstruggling friend. Can't tell you, Will. Wouldn't believe. Can't tell you. In there, oh, in there. Shut up. Will socked his arm. Scare heck out of me, just like she scared us. Bugs. It's almost supper time. Folks thinks we're dead and buried. They were striding now, slashing the autumn grass with their shoes. Beyond the tents, in the hay-smelling, leaf-mold fields, Will glaring at town, Jim staring back at the high, now darkening banners as the last of the sun hid under the earth. Will, we gotta come back tonight. Tonight! Okay, come back alone. Jim stopped. You wouldn't let me come alone. You're always going to be around, aren't you, Will, to protect me? Look, who needs protection? Will laughed, and then did not laugh again, for Jim was looking at him, the last wild light dying in his mouth, and caught in the thin hollows of his nostrils and in his suddenly deep-set eyes. You'll always be with me, huh, Will? Jim simply breathed warm upon him, and his blood stirred with the old, the familiar answers. Yes. Yes, you know it. Yes, yes. And turning together, they stumbled over a clanking, dark mound of leather bag. They stood for a long moment over the huge leather bag. Almost secretively, Will kicked it. It made the sound of iron indigestion. Why, said Will, that belongs to the lightning rod salesman. Jim slipped his hand through the leather mouth and hefted forth a metal shaft clustered with chimeras. Chinese dragons, all fang, eyeball, and moss-green armor, all cross and crescent, every symbol around the world that made men safe, or seemed to, clung there, grieving the boy's hands with odd weight and meaning. Storm never came, but he went. Where? And why did he leave his bag? They both looked out to the carnival where dusk colored the canvas billows. Shadows ran coolly out to engulf them. People in cars honked home in tired commotions. Boys on skeleton bikes whistled dogs after. Soon night would own the midway while shadows rode the Ferris wheel up to cloud the stars. People, said Jim, don't leave their whole life lying around. This is everything that the old man owned. Something important. Jim breathed soft fire, made him forget. So he just walked off and left this here? What? What's so important you forget everything? Why, Jim examined his friend curiously, twilight in his face. No one can tell you. You find it yourself. Mysteries and mysteries. Storm salesman's bag. If we don't look now, we might never know. Jim, in 10 minutes, sure, Midway'll be dark. Everyone home for dinner. Just us alone. But won't it feel great? Just us. And here we go, back in. Passing the mirror maze, they saw two armies. A billion Jims, a billion Wills collide, melt, vanish. And like those armies, so vanished the real army of people. They boys stood alone among the encampments of dusk, thinking of all the boys in town sitting down to warm food in bright rooms. The red-lettered sign said, "Out of order. Keep off." Sign's been up all day. I don't believe signs, said Jim. They peered in at the merry-go-round, which lay under a dry rattle and roar of wind-tumbled oak trees. Its horses, goats, and antelopes, zebras, speared through their spines with brass javelins, hung contorted, as in a death rictus, asking mercy with their fright-colored eyes, seeking revenge with their panic-colored teeth. Don't look broke to me. Jim ambled across the clanking chain, leaped to a turntable surface vast as the moon among the frantic but forever spelled beasts. Jim! Will, this is the only ride we haven't looked at, so... Jim swayed. The lunatic carousel whirl stirred a tilt with his lean bulk. He strolled through the brass forests amid the animal rousts. He swung astride a plum dusk stallion. Ho, boy, get! A man rose from machinery darkness. Jim! Reaching out from the shadows among the calliope tubes and moon-skinned drums, the man hoisted Jim, yelling out in the air. Help, Will, help! Will leaped through the animals. The man smiled easily, welcomed him handily, swung him high beside Jim. They stared down at bright flame red hair, bright flame blue eyes, and rippling biceps. Out of order, said the man. Can't you read? Put them down, said a gentle voice. Hung high, Jim and Will glanced over at a second man standing tall behind the chains. Down, he said again, and they were carried through the brass forest of wild but uncomplaining brutes and set in the dust. We were, said Will, curious. This second man was tall as a lamppost. His pale face, lunar pockmarks denting it, cast light on those who stood below. His vest was the color of flesh blood. His eyes, brows, his hair, his suit were licorice black. And the sun-yellow gem which starred from the tie-pin thrust his cravat was the same unblinking shade and bright crystal as his eyes. But in this instant, swiftly, and with utter clearness, it was the suit which fascinated Will, for it seemed woven of boar bramble, clock-sprung spring hair, bristle, and a sort of ever-trembling, ever-glistening dark hemp. The suit caught the light and stirred like a bed of black tweed thorns, interminably itching, covering the man's long body with motion so it seemed he should excruciate, cry out, and tear the clothes free. Yet here he stood, moon calm, inhabiting its itch-weed suit, and watching Jim's mouth with his yellow eyes. He never looked once at Will. The name is Dark. He flourished a white calling card. It turned blue. Whisper. Red. Whisk. A green man dangled from a tree stamped on the card. Flit. Shh. Dark. And my friend with the red hair there is Mr. Cougar, of Cougar and Darks. Flit. Flick. Shh. Names appeared, disappeared on the white square. Combined shadow of shows. Tick. Wash. A mushroom which stirred moldering herb pots. And Cross-Continental Pandemonium Theater Company. He handed the card to Jim. It now read, Our speciality, to examine, oil, polish, and repair Death Watch beetles. Calmly, Jim read it. Calmly, Jim put a fist into his copious and richly treasured pockets, rummaged, and held out his hand. On his palm lay a dead brown insect. Here, Jim said, fix this. Mr. Dark exploded his laugh. Superb! I will! He extended his hand, his shirt sleeve pulled up. Bright purple, black green, and lightning blue eels, worms, and Latin scrolls slid to view on his wrist. Boy, cried Will, you must be the tattooed man. No, Jim studied the stranger, the illustrated man. There's a difference. Mr. Dark nodded, pleased. What's your name, boy? Don't tell him, thought Will, and stopped. Why not, he wondered. Why? Jim's lips hardly twitched. Simon, he said. He smiled to show it was a lie. Mr. Dark smiled to show he knew it. Want to see more, Simon? Jim would not give him the satisfaction of a nod. Slowly, With great mouth-working pleasure, Mr. Dark pushed his sleeve high to its elbow. Jim stared. The arm was like a cobra, weaving, bobbing, swaying to strike. Mr. Dark clenched his fists, wriggled his fingers. The muscles danced. Will wanted to turn around and see, but could only watch, thinking Jim. Oh, Jim! For there stood Jim, and there was this tall man, each examining the other as if he were a reflection in a shop window late at night. The tall man's brambled suit shadowed, out now to color Jim's cheeks and storm over his wide and drinking eyes with a look of rain instead of the sharp cat green they always were. Jim stood like a runner who has come a long way, fever in his mouth, hands open to receive any gift. And right now it was a gift of pictures, twitched in pantomime, as Mr. Dark made his illustrious jerk cold skinned over his warm-pulsed wrist as the stars came out above, and Jim stared, and Will could not see, and a long way off the last of the town people went away toward the town in their warm cars. And Jim said faintly, "Gosh!" And Mr. Dark rolled down his sleeve. "Show's over. Supper time. Carnival shut up until 7. Everyone out! Come back, Simon, and ride the merry-go-round when it's fixed. Take this card. Free ride." Jim stared at the hidden wrist and put the card in his pocket. "So long." Jim ran. Will ran. Jim whirled, glanced back, leaped, and for the second time in the hour vanished. Will looked up into the tree where Jim squirmed onto a limb, hidden. Mr. Dark and Mr. Cougar were turned away, busy with the merry-go-round. "Quick, Will!" "Jim? They'll see you! Jump!" Will jumped. Jim hauled him up. The great tree shook. A wind roared by in the sky. Jim helped him cling, grasping among the branches. "Jim, we don't belong here." "Shut up! Look!" whispered Jim. Somewhere in the carousel machinery, there were traps and brass knockings, a faint squeal and whistle of calliope steam. "What was on his arm, Jim?" "A picture." "Yeah, but what kind?" "It was," Jim shut his eyes, "it was a picture of a snake. That's it, a snake." But when he opened his eyes, he could not look at Will. "Okay, if you don't want to tell me." "I told you, Will, a snake. I'll get him to show it to you later. You want that?" "No," thought Will, "I don't want that." He looked down at the billion footprints left in the sawdust on the empty midway, and suddenly it was a lot closer to midnight than to noon. "I'm going home." "Sure, Will, go on. Mirror mazes, old teacher ladies, lost lightning rod bags, lightning rod salesmen disappear like snake pictures, dancing unbroken merry-go-rounds, and you want to go home? Sure, old friend. Will, so long." Will started down the tree and froze. "All clear?" cried a voice below. "Clear!" someone shouted at the far end of the midway. Mr. Dark moved, not 50 feet away to a red control box near the merry-go-round ticket booth. He glared in all directions. He glared into the tree. Will hugged. Jim hugged the limb, tightened into smallness. "Start up!" With a pop and a bang, and a jangle of reins, a lift and downfall, a rise and descent of brass, the carousel moved. "But," thought Will, "it's broke, out of order." He flicked a glance at Jim, who pointed wildly down. The merry-go-round was running, yes, but it was running backward. The small calliope inside the carousel machinery rattle-snapped its nervous stallion shivering drums, clashed its harvest moon cymbals, toothed its castanets, and throatily choked and sobbed its reeds, whistles, and baroque flutes. The music, Will thought, it's backward too. Mr. Dark jerked about, glanced up, as if he had heard Will's thoughts, and wind shook the trees in black tumults. Mr. Dark shrugged and looked away. The carousel wheeled faster, shrieking, plunging, going roundabout back. Now Mr. Cougar, with his flaming red hair and fire-blue eyes, was pacing the midway, making a last check. He stood under their tree. Will could have let spit down on him. Then the calliope gave a particularly violent cry of foul murder, which made dogs howl in far countries, and Mr. Cougar, spinning, ran and leaped in on the back-whirling universe of animals who, tail first, head last, pursued an endless circling night toward unfound and never-to-be-discovered destinations. Hand-slapping brass poles, he flung himself into a seat where, with his bristly red hair, pink face, and incredible sharp blue eyes, he sat silent, going back around, the music squealing swift back with him like insucked breath. The music, thought Will. What is it? And how do I know it's backside first? He hugged the limb, tried to catch the tune, then hum it forward in his head. But the brass bells, the drums hammered his chest, revved his heart, so he felt his pulse reverse. His blood turned back in perverse thrusts through all his flesh. So he was nearly shaken free to fall. So all he did was clutch, hanging pale, and drink the sight of the backward-turning machine and Mr. Dark, alert at the controls on the sidelines. It was Jim who first noticed the new thing happening, for he kicked Will once. Will looked over, and Jim nodded frantically at the man in the machine as he came around the next time. Mr. Cougar's face was melting like pink wax. His hands were becoming doll's hands. His bones sank away beneath his clothes. His clothes then shrank down to fit his dwindling frame. His face flickered going, and each time around he melted more. Will saw Jim's head shift, circling. The carousel wheeled, a great back-drifting lunar dream, the horses thrusting, the music ingasped, and after, while Mr. Cougar was as simple as shadows, as simple as night, as simple as time, got younger and younger and younger. Each time he wheeled to view, he sat alone with his bones, which shaped like warm candles burned away to tender years. He gazed serenely at the fiery constellations, the children-inhabited trees, which went away from him as he removed himself from them, and his nose finished, and his sweet wax ears reshaped themselves to small pink roses. Now no longer 40, where he had begun his back-spiraled journey, Mr. Cougar was 19. Around went the reverse parade of horse, pole music. Man became young man fast rendered down to boy. Mr. Cougar was 17, 16, another and another time. Around under the sky and trees, and Will whispering, Jim counting the times around, while the night air warmed to summer heat by friction of sun-metal brass. The passionate back-turned flight of breasts wore the wax doll down and washed him clean with the still stranger musics until all ceased. All died away to stillness. The calliope shut up its brass works. The ironmongery machines hissed off, and with a last faint whine, like desert sands blown back up, Arabian hourglasses, the carousel rocked on seaweed waters and stood still. The figure seated on the carved white wooden sleigh chair was very small. Mr. Cougar was 12 years old. No. Will's mouth shaped the word. No. Jim's did the same. The small shape stepped down from the silent world, its face in shadow, but its hands, newborn wrinkled pink, held out in raw carnival lamplight. The strange man-boy shot his gaze up, down, smelling fright somewhere, terror and awe in the vicinity. Will balled himself tight and shut his eyes. He felt the terrible gaze shoot through the leaves like brown needle darts pass on. Then, rabbit running, the small shape lit off down the empty midway. Jim was first to stir the leaves aside. Mr. Dark was gone too, in the evening hush. It seemed to take Jim forever to fall down to earth. Will fell after, and they both stood, clamorous with alarms, shaken by concussions of silent pantomime, blasted by events all the more numbing because they ran off into the night unknown. It was Jim who spoke from their mutual confusion, and trembling as each held to the other's arm, seeing the small shadow rush, luring them across the meadow. "Oh, Will, I wish we could go home. I wish we could eat. But it's too late. We got to see more, don't we?" "Lord," said Will miserably, "I guess we do." And they ran together, following they didn't know what, on out and away to who could possibly guess where. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you've had a great day. Join us again tomorrow for Edgar Allan Poe Thursdays. I have not yet selected the piece that will be done, so it might be a bit of a surprise. I apologize for that. But tune in tomorrow nonetheless for Edgar Allan Poe Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And also remember, please stay safe out there.